you'll be getting a notification. Okay, so for the audience that does not know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, I'm Stewart Rhodes. I'm the founder of Oath Keepers. I started that organization back in 2009, and that's an organization made up of prior military, law enforcement, first responders, like firefighters, EMS, search and rescue. I served as a paratrooper in the Army until I was disabled in a parachuting accident, and I also served as a firefighter in Montana for a brief time. I'm a Yale Law School graduate. Before that, I worked for Congressman Ron Paul in Washington, D.C., on his D.C. staff in between college and law school. And then after law school, I clerked for the Arizona Supreme Court. And then I was a small town criminal defense attorney in Montana until I started Oath Keepers. I frankly lost faith in our legal system. And I consider myself now a recovering lawyer, a bit like being a recovering alcoholic. So I started Oath Keepers because I realized that the political class in this country, with very few exceptions, has betrayed their oath to the Constitution and don't take it seriously. And they all take the oath, same oath I took as a paratrooper, but they don't mean it. Their fingers are crossed behind their back, and when they get in office, they just do whatever they want to do, and it's both parties. So I realized the rot was pretty bad. I wanted to focus on the men who would be given orders to violate people's rights. And so a big example we use, and we talk to people about this, is Hurricane Katrina, where you had cops brought in from all over the country to help after the hurricane, but then they wound up following blatantly unconstitutional orders to confiscate firearms from peaceable citizens who were just trying to protect themselves and their property. That order was later ruled, it was an order issued by the governor, or the mayor of the city and the police chief were anti-gun. That was later ruled to be unconstitutional by a court, but that didn't help the people on the ground that day. And so just like in the military, we're taught the laws of war, and we're taught the obligation to refuse unlawful orders. And just as we told the Nazis at Nuremberg and put them on trial, just following orders is no defense. And so we were taught that. And the example that was used for us when I was in the military and back in the 80s was the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. We had Lieutenant Colley defending what he did. He ordered his men to shoot women and children, little babies, indefensible. But he said, "I'm just following orders," and he was put on trial. And same thing, he was told at trial that's not a valid defense. So we wanted to make sure that the military knows. I mean, the military we were taught that, but when they're used domestically, like we saw in Katrina, you had National Guard units and law enforcement officers being used domestically. The benchmark is not the laws of war. The benchmark is the Bill of Rights. And so that was the whole point of Oath Keepers, was to teach them more about the oath they all swore to defend the Constitution, more about the Constitution that they swore to defend, because how can you defend it if you don't know it? And then also to inspire them to do the right thing. So that was the whole point of Oath Keepers up front.
So I do want to talk about, there's a lot we have to get into in the interview. Right. But one of the things I do want to talk about is the most recent thing that happened, which was when Trump came into office, you received a pardon. Am I?
No, actually, I received a commutation.
Okay.
So just the backdrop. So January the 6th, 2021, we were there in Washington, D.C. to do volunteer security for 2 permitted events on Capitol grounds. And we had done 9 prior security operations in Washington, D.C. to protect Trump supporters from Antifa, and also across the country, hundreds of different operations protecting free speech. And in all of those operations, we never once had to actually use force. No pepper spray, discharge, no kicking or punching anyone, no use of a club, and certainly no one being shot. We used our presence and we deterred them. Oath Keepers was made up about 30% of our membership were law enforcement officers, both current serving and retired. And current serving law enforcement can carry anywhere in the country. And retired law enforcement, many of them have LEOSA credentials. That's the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, was passed after 9/11 to allow police officers to carry nationwide. So that was our backdrop in our history, and that's what we were doing on January the 6th. So we were railroaded in a manufactured false narrative designed to prevent President Trump from being able to take office again, to disqualify him under the 14th Amendment, or to put him in prison. They charged him the first time any president or ex-president has ever been charged with a felony in U.S. history. And so the intent was obviously to keep him from being able to take office again. It didn't work. And also, they were distracting from their own coup. It's like classic projection. It really is just like Solzhenitsyn described in the Soviet Union. It's classic projection. They accuse you of doing what they are actually doing, and they also gaslight you. They tell you that no one else is seeing what you're seeing. What you're seeing is not true. You know, it's an inversion of reality, an inversion of the facts. So that's the backdrop. So yes, I was falsely imprisoned. I was put in solitary confinement for over a year, including pretrial. So from the day of my arrest, despite having my only prior, offenses were speeding tickets, never been arrested in my life, never charged with a crime in my life, and yet they they held me in solitary confinement the entire time, pre-trial and during my trial. And the whole point was to break us, to force us into false confessions, and then to coerce us into turning on each other and then also turning on President Trump. And we refused to do that, myself and my co-defendants, and we went to trial. Of course, in Washington, D.C., you're not going to get a fair trial if you're a Trump supporter. The judges described Washington, D.C., the people of Washington, D.C., as the victims of J6. They said, oh, the people in D.C. are victims. And yet they insisted on drawing the jury pool from the victim pool. It's very similar if you were accused of like robbing a convenience store and they took the jury from the people that were there the night of the robbery. That's how ridiculous it was. And the reason why they wanted to deny venue change, they didn't want to give President Trump any precedent because they're going to put him on trial too. He was charged with felonies in Washington, D.C. also. And they didn't want a precedent he can point to of changing the venue, moving the trial outside of D.C. That's why they denied venue change to all of us, to guarantee convictions, to further the false narrative. But ultimately, the goal was to get him. So yes, I was put in prison on false charges and a false conviction. And I spent 3 years in prison until, by the grace of God, President Trump won the election. Well, first he survived an assassination attempt, two, in fact. So when they couldn't put him in prison, when they couldn't keep him out of office under the 14th Amendment, when they couldn't demonize him and the MAGA movement to the point where he was unelectable, all those were their attempts. When all those failed, they tried to kill him twice. And I do believe that was intentionally done. There's no way they're just a lone gunman. So, but that didn't work. God will use for good what man means for evil. And that's what happened, both with President Trump and with all of us. So we persevered, and he did as well. He's the king of perseverance, frankly, top champion. So when he came into office, yes, on first day, inauguration day, January 20th, 2025, he set us all free. Everyone was pardoned except 14 of us. There were 14, all of them either Oath Keepers or Proud Boys, the two groups that were charged with seditious conspiracy. Only members of those two groups were charged with that charge as part of the false narrative. So we are still awaiting. I put in my pardon application this last week, and Ed Martin is a new pardon attorney, and it looks very good. I think it's a very good chance. I have faith that I will eventually be pardoned.
One thing I do want to ask, Lucas, you have a question. I just want to address this thing first. Is you have had, I mean, you've been doing this since before I was born. No, not before I was born, but around when I was born.
What year were you born?
2006. 2006. But
Yeah,
I was
fun.
going to say though, you face a lot of attacks.
Thanks a lot, and I feel really friggin' old.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm starting to feel old. I am now an adult, and so is Luke.
You got a long way to go.
You started a kid not too long ago, so we're all adults now.
Yeah, but one thing I do want to ask is, whether it's being put in prison and having just like a very interesting career as this leader of a group, right, that is politically motivated, right? What kinds of attacks have you faced, like just throughout your career, and how have you kind of dealt with that, right? Because it seems like you've dealt with everything for the most part.
Right. Well, I mean, it's interesting because to me, the Oath Keeper mission is really a continuation of the Ron Paul movement mission. And I worked for Congressman Paul in Congress, and then when he ran for president in 2008, and something people should know, and probably don't know, is we got a bunch of Democrats that crossed over and voted for Ron Paul. That's like the original walkaways. We had that before. There were crossover voters for Reagan too, but a large number came over and voted, joined the Republican Party for Ron Paul's campaign because they saw his record. He was a very sincere constitutionalist and sincerely anti-war, sincerely anti-military industrial complex, anti-prison industrial complex. He was very, very sincere, and he's proved up over decades of his own records. You can watch his vote in Congress. He was known as Dr. No. And so they came across, they didn't trust Hillary Clinton. They didn't trust Barack Obama. They saw the corruption in their own party. None of us, of course, trusted John McCain. We knew he was another establishment deep stater. So, but they trusted Ron Paul, and they came across the lines. That's happened again with Trump. And so, really, I'm a constitutionalist. And if you want to put a political label on me, you can put maybe libertarian on me. But I'm a Ron Paul Republican, libertarian. So I could never vote for the Democrats. Never have voted Democrat in my life because of, number one, the gun issue. I believe very, very strongly in the right to keep and bear arms, but also because of abortion. I'm anti-abortion. And Ron Paul is a libertarian, but he's a pro-life libertarian. For very, very obvious fundamental reasons that that's a life. It's not just your body, your choice. It's also a separate life. And anyone that's looked at ultrasounds of unborn infants, they know the reality. That's an individual person right there. So, point being, though, that when I started Oath Keepers, we made it very clear that we're nonpartisan in the sense that we are going to call out, and we did, both Republicans and Democrats when they violate the Constitution. So, like when I was a student at Yale Law School, my major research paper was on enemy combatant status, which is the claim that the President of the United States can designate any American to be an unlawful combatant in the war on terror and strip them of their due process rights. No jury trial, no grand jury indictment, no jury trial, none of the rights that are obviously in our Constitution and also in Article 3 of the Constitution. So it's completely bypassing the Constitution of the United States and holding American citizens in military detention, which they did to two American citizens, Yasser Hamdi and Jose Padilla. They're both held in a brig in South Carolina for years without access to an attorney. And the claim was the president could do this just by his say-so alone. Any American could be treated exactly the same as a foreign enemy in wartime, making no distinction between us and them. And so I wrote about that while I was a student at Yale Law School and calling it out as blatantly unconstitutional. And that paper won Yale's top prize for the best paper on the Bill of Rights, university-wide. And after that, I was designated for a year as a Yale research scholar. So it's kind of interesting. Back then, the leftists in the law school, professors and the students loved me because I was criticizing Republicans. Some of the more conservative professors thought I was actually a Democrat or a leftist because I was criticizing President Bush. They didn't realize that I'm a constitutionalist. I'll criticize anyone who violates the Constitution. So it's just been kind of a bizarre change of events now that people see me as some kind of far right-wing radical. That's what they want to characterize me as, but really I'm a libertarian.
Well, I was wondering too, like, just like on a daily basis, whether it's being criticized or, people like hating you without ever meeting you.
Right.
I'm saying, like, what were those kinds of attacks too? Like, I could only imagine, like, just even on a personal level, if someone were to say, hey, I'm in support of Donald Trump, like Luke and I have seen like how people react to something like that. Right. So for you to be so publicly not only in support of him, but of things that the left completely despise, I'm saying, like, on a daily, day-to-day, like, how's it affected you? Like, what has the left done to you? And like, or what have just people done?
Well, I look at it like this. Propaganda is very effective. And so I look at people who have bought into the propaganda. I see them as victims of the propaganda. And so that's how I feel about them. I've actually talked to rank and file Antifa. We had one guy, we were protected because after Trump got elected, Antifa was raiding through the streets, starting at Trump's inauguration, not just breaking windows like they've always done, blocking up and breaking windows against corporate America, but they were also attacking Trump supporters and trying to shut down their speech with violence. When we stepped up in downtown Berkeley in the park at Martin Luther King Park twice in a row, in Portland, Oregon, and then in Boston. We were at an event in Boston protecting a Trump supporter rally, and this one young kid came over and talked to us. He's still wearing his mask and stuff, but he said I'm kind of uncomfortable with, because they're flying they're flying communist flags up on the hill right where he was at. He just said, hey, I'm just letting you guys know I'm not really down with that. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm just here to protest against racism. So we talked to him for a while. I made it very clear. Like, I'm a quarter Mexican. Half my family is, on my mom's side, were migrant farm workers from California. And my step grandfather, the only grandfather I knew on that side of the family, was actually a Filipino immigrant who had married my grandmother when my mom was 10. So I was raised, eating Filipino food and Mexican food. That's my culture. So it's just, and half my cousins out in California are half Mexican and half Filipino. So it's just ridiculous. And we just talked to them. It's like, look, man, we're not freaking racist. We're just Americans that want to preserve the Bill of Rights. That's pretty much it. And after we started talking to him, like, what do you believe in? And I believe in individual freedom. You're opposed to drug laws? Well, so are we. So am I. So we talked to him for a while. And we're like, you should be over here with us. He said, you're a libertarian, actually. It was pretty funny. So I think the rank and file, they've been manipulated. Their leadership knows what they're doing. A lot of their leadership are dyed-in-the-wool communist professors, and they brainwash these kids into believing that everyone over here is actually a racist and a Nazi. And then he had Biden when he was installed, I think illegitimately, but he's installed in the White House doing that ridiculous press conference or show in front of an Independence Hall with a red backlighting and two Marines standing behind him and describing the MAGA movement as the greatest threat to democracy. It was just ridiculous. And basically saying that all Trump supporters are fascists, we're all Nazis, we're all racist, we're all the KKK. That's the demonization that's been done. But it's not working. And obviously it didn't work because President Trump was reelected with an overwhelming majority of the popular vote now. And when I was in prison, I would say like 95% of the inmates were pro-Trump, black, white, and Hispanic. They all loved President Trump. First of all, he signed the First Step Act. Nobody else did that. Barack Obama didn't do that. So it makes it so they're going to go home earlier to their families. But they also realize that it's a bunch of crap. They realize he's not a racist. Some of them knew him from New York back in the day when he was a builder there. They respect him as a businessman. And they trust him. They trust him because they don't believe he can be bought. I don't think he can be either. So he gained a lot of respect. And just like Ron Paul, because of that respect and people believe he's legit, he got a crossover vote. And the left does not want to talk about that. But the black male vote was for Trump overwhelmingly. Black Hispanics were for Trump. Male Hispanics were for Trump overwhelmingly. So he won a large segment of, I would say, the working class, especially working class men. They're victims. I look at them as victims of propaganda to this day.
What was your
got one
time
more question, and then I just got one more question, and then I'll let Luke to go. How was your experience with people like the feds, like the FBI, especially under the Biden administration? Like, did you notice, like, what were they like? I imagine like you did not have a good experience, right? Most people do not.
They just like the Nazis. They just followed orders. They were told to go after us, and they did. In fact, it started under Trump's administration. It's important to point out that during Trump's administration, the FBI and DHS were actively recruiting people to be paid informants against us and against the Proud Boys and against other groups on the political right. So you can go look at the case of Jeremy Brown, the Oath Keeper from Florida, who was a Special Forces combat vet, recently retired. They approached him and offered him money, and he recorded the conversation and to his credit, exposed it. He put it all over the web, put it on Gateway Pundit, and it went all over the place, embarrassed them, which is why they singled him out for especially rough treatment. They planted evidence on him. They raided his home in Florida. On J6, all he didn't even go inside the Capitol. All he did is escort an old lady back to her hotel because she was tired, didn't want to be out there anymore. She was the mother of one of the speakers at an event we were going to protect that day. So he escorted her to her room. But a judge in D.C., which is odd because usually search warrants are issued by the federal judge in the district where you live. This one was issued by a judge in D.C. to search his home in Florida. And on the way in, the FBI turned off the cameras, and just the same thing did with Mar-a-Lago. And why would they want to do that? So that you can't see them planting evidence. And then they said they found 2 grenades on his property that did not have any of his fingerprints, any of his DNA, no fibers from his home or dogs were on the grenades. In fact, there were fibers from someplace else. And yet the jury, it's just a problem with federal courts. The juries just go along with whatever they're told to do by the prosecutors. So they found him guilty of possessing, illegal weapons in Florida. My point being, though, is that J6 was a manipulated event, and the whole goal was to distract what they had done. They had pulled a coup. If you guys want to read about it, go read the Times Magazine article that was put out in February of 2021, where they bragged about how they saved democracy in the name of COVID by going across the country in a very coordinated effort to change the election laws, which means violate the election laws in every state. They violated election laws in all the key swing states. They just ignored the restrictions on mail-in ballots. They ignored signature and date requirements. They ignored the requirement for chain of custody for ballots. They had those unsecured drop boxes all over the place. They directly violated state law, and they bragged about it in this article. It was not a just like so people just happened to think of the same thing across the country. No, it was a coordinated plan, well funded by Zuckerberg. So Zuckerbucks, millions of dollars were spent to go into counties in key states, in key swing states, and convince the local um, election officials or state judges to let them just do what they wanted to do and ignore state law. What that did is made it illegal under state election law, but also unconstitutional under Article 2. Because Article 2 makes it very clear that it's the state legislatures that shall determine the manner for selecting electors. It says nothing about state judges, it says nothing about executive branch officials, election officials. The state legislature decides. So that's why they had to project onto us what they had actually done. They pulled a coup, but to distract from that, they twisted J6 into something it was not. It was a protest. It certainly was no insurrection. If we had, if that was an intentional insurrection, it's the most incompetent insurrection in world history. Because here I am, an Army Airborne veteran. I got Special Forces just recently combat veteran. I've got my operations leader for that day was Michael Green, otherwise known as Whip, a black veteran, who was a sapper in the Army with extensive combat experience. A sapper is an explosives expert. And he also worked for Triple Canopy all over the world, and he worked for the State Department. This guy knows what he's doing. And yet, neither one of those two men, my two best trained oath keepers, were in the building. Instead, the guy that went in and led the team that did go inside was Kelly Meggs, great guy, but he's a car salesman from Florida. So why would I put a car salesman in charge of the assault of the Capitol? And why would I have all of them go in with no guns and no explosives? If I actually wanted to take the Capitol, we would have brought guns, and I would have had Michael Green, my explosives expert, cook up a bunch of IEDs and car bombs, right? So we didn't do that because that wasn't our intent that day. We were there only to do security. That's it. But they had to twist, because we were there, they had to twist our presence, the presence of the Proud Boys, and say, oh, these two horrible groups they've been demonizing for well over a decade, in my case, 15 years. They had to twist that into, oh, Trump told them to go inside, and these two violent extremist groups led the attack. That was the propaganda that was all over the media from day one. And the same propaganda was put out by false propaganda was put out by the J6, so-called J6 Select Committee. Same propaganda in the prosecution. They're all in lockstep. It's all a big lie. But the point was to distract them from what they had done and to put onto us kind of like a wag the dog, Reichstag fire kind of moment. You guys know the history of the Reichstag fire, right? So the Nazis had fired their own legislature, blamed it on their opponents, the communists and the anarchists back in Germany, and then use that to justify setting aside all due process rights, and then that became the dictatorship of Adolf Hitler. So that's what they wanted. That's what they did here. They used J6 as their Reichstag fire moment to distract from what they had done and to justify a clampdown, unprecedented clampdown on a political opponent and on his movement. But it didn't work.
What was being a January 6th like from your point of view as a participant and eyewitness, like on the day itself?
So on January the 6th, we were there to protect two permitted events. One was Latinos for Trump, which I was a member of because I'm part Mexican. And that was about a block north of the Capitol in what's known as Area 7. That's the lower Senate Park right next to the Senate office buildings. I spoke there that morning, and so did Kelly Sorrell, the general counsel for Oath Keepers. Then we were going to protect Ali Alexander's event in Area 8, which is right outside the East Capitol doors. So that's where our guys, Kelly Meggs and his team from Florida, they were tasked that day with escorting Ali Alexander's speakers and VIPs, protecting them at the Ellipse rally for President Trump. They're in the VIP section of the Ellipse rally, protecting their protectees. And then they were tasked and planned to then go from the Ellipse rally to the Capitol to the event they were going to speak at. This is all done prior to J6. There were like 9 permits pulled for events all around the Capitol. And it's the same exact thing that happened back in November of 2020 and December of 2020. There were multiple events and permitted events around the Capitol in November and December. And it was a pattern of people going from some big event, like in November, they marched from the Freedom Plaza rally up to the Capitol, filled the grass, and then listened to speakers that were on the steps of the Supreme Court, filled the street in between the U.S. Capitol and Supreme Court. Because you know the layout of D.C. down by the White House, and there's Freedom Plaza there. Washington Monument, and you walk all the way up past the Lincoln Memorial, and you keep going, and there's the Capitol. On the side of the Capitol on the east side is where the Supreme Court is. That's where everyone had gone in November and December, and the same pattern was going to happen on J6. So it's part of the false propaganda of January the 6th to say, and this is media continues to say to this day, that, oh, they were going to be at the Ellipse rally only until Trump ordered them to march on the Capitol. Then they all decided to go to the Capitol. This is not true. There are already events planned around the Capitol. And that's why we were there, to protect those events. So what happened is that myself and Kelly Sorrell, we spoke at the J6 or the Latinos for Trump rally. And then her and I were dating too, just to see you know. So we were there, we spoke about the election being stolen, we laid it all out. And then it was really cold that day. She got super cold. One of our volunteers from Florida had a hotel room nearby. And so we went to his hotel room to warm up. And we're sitting in his suite watching Trump's speech, eating lunch. We grabbed some food from a food truck. Our guys were still doing their security duties at the, like I said, down at the Ellipse, escorting Ali Alexander's speakers. And the key point, at that event that Ali Alexander was going to be holding on the East Capitol steps, Roger Stone was the scheduled keynote speaker. And then members of Congress were going to speak there, including Margaret Taylor Greene, Josh Hawley, a bunch of them were going to speak. That was the plan that day. But so we're in the hotel room warming up, watching the tail end of President Trump's speech. And then Michael Green, my operations leader, called me and said, hey, the Trump supporters are storming onto the Capitol grounds. And I was like, really? And I saw some clips on our chat. We use Signal for our operations chat. We always did that across the country. First, because it's encrypted. We don't want bad guys listening to our chatter. So we use Signal to communicate. And also because we've been kicked off every other platform. We just got kicked off of Discord like 2 months before that. So we're like, okay, we got to use Signal for our chats. So on the Signal chat, people posted some video of a Trump supporter being punched by a police officer. And I could see that I knew on the west side, there were people fighting with the cops. I didn't want my guys, who I knew were coming from the west side, coming towards the Capitol's west side from the Ellipse. I didn't want them to get caught up in that. So I was trying to contact them, and I went down to the Capitol to try to locate my security teams I knew were coming to the Capitol. I want to make sure they sit out of that hassle on the west side. So Kelly Sorrell and I walked around the north end of the Capitol and towards the northwest side of it, looking for our guys, trying to spot them. And that's when I finally realized that anyone had gone inside. I had no idea until I saw some Trump supporters coming up a ramp from down below. It's obvious they come up out of the Capitol building. And that's when I realized, oh, crap. Some Trump supporters got inside the building. Then we went to the northeast corner of the Capitol. I'm still close to where Area 8 was, where our guys were supposed to be. I'm trying to spot them. And I said, if you're not on duty, if you're not on security detail, come to me and come where I'm at. I'm not inside, but on the outside of the building on the northeast corner. I wanted to get my guys together and keep them with me, keep them out of trouble. Unbeknownst to me, some of our guys did go in. This is a huge building and a huge crowd. I didn't see my own people. They were down a ways. They had gone inside. What happened with them is a couple of people they're protecting went up the steps, and so they followed their protectees up the steps. And then the doors opened from the inside, opened by somebody else. And this was about 20 minutes after Congress had actually recessed. And then they're in a crowd, and they got pushed in. It's kind of like being on toothpaste tube. You're going in because the crowd's going. You can't really go back against the crowd. So they got sandwiched into the Capitol. But once they were inside, I found out later because they walked up to me and told me they had gone inside. They told me they had helped police officers inside. When they walked up to me and told me they had gone in, I said that was stupid. And the reason why I said that is because I know that because if we're oath keepers, we're going to be targeted by our enemies. We're going to be singled out, and they'll use that to go after us. That's what happened. But inside the Capitol, the team led by Kelly Meggs did a prayer circle. I find out later. I watched some video and talked to them about this. They did a prayer circle, and then they actually de-escalated a confrontation, a potentially deadly confrontation with Harry Dunn, a Capitol police officer, really large, like 6'5", black police officer, had his rifle in his hand, a select fire M4, and he was hyperventilating and angry and about to shoot a bunch of Trump supporters. Our guys saw that, and they got in between the Trump supporters and Harry Dunn, put their back to the officer, put their hands towards the Trump supporters, and de-escalated the situation. And that probably saved a tragedy. Ashley Babbitt had already been murdered, shot, an unarmed Air Force veteran, already been killed by, I believe the guy's name is Bird, a Capitol police officer. Gross excessive force, obviously. But this could have been even worse than that. If Harry Dunn had opened up a 30-round magazine with an M4 on a crowd of Trump supporters inside the Capitol, it could have been dozens dead. So our guys de-escalated it. Harry Dunn, when he first gave an interview to the FBI, admitted that the Oath Keepers had helped him. But by his second interview, the FBI coached him to change his testimony. And by the time he got on the stand, it went from "they helped me" to "oh, that was some other group that helped me. I was mistaken. It wasn't the Oath Keepers. Some other group yet to be identified helped me that day." And he said, "oh, they were actually hostile." And he also said, "oh, and Officer Lazarus was with me." And Officer Lazarus was a Capitol Police special agent who was on the security team for Nancy Pelosi. And he got on the stand and said, "yeah, I was with Harry Dunn that day. I saw this confrontation with these aggressive Oath Keepers who were threatening Harry Dunn. They didn't help him, they were threatening him." Well, turns out that was both of them were lying on the stand. Steve Baker from Blaze Media later found a video of Officer Lazarus in the tunnels under the Senate building at that time. When he said he was with Harry Dunn, he couldn't have been there because he was actually in the tunnels under the Senate building at that time. So they both lied on the stand to create this false narrative that our guys didn't help Harry Dunn, but actually threatened him. So that's what happened across the board in all of our trials. Coached, suborning perjury, like enticing perjury, soliciting perjury, is a crime. It's a federal offense. It's a felony. So is conspiracy to commit perjury. But this was done across the board in all our cases by the prosecutors. Prosecutors coach people to lie and have their witnesses lie on the stand. We haven't just catch these two. But there are two that are caught red-handed. You can't dispute it. It's a fact. They were not together. They couldn't have been together because Officer Lazarus was someplace else at that time. They lied on the stand. But that happened across all our cases, and no judge has ever held them to account for that. And they're not going to, because they're all political partisans.
What was your time in prison like?
Well, oddly enough, of course, my rights were violated out of the gate when I was arrested. I was arrested a year after January the 6th. I was arrested on January 13, 2022. I hadn't gone inside. I didn't fight with police outside. So it took them a year to cook up false testimony that they coerced, scared a couple other Oath Keepers into dishonoring themselves into pleading guilty to seditious conspiracy, which they had not done. There was no conspiracy at all. But these two guys were afraid to go to trial, afraid to go to prison. They threatened all of us with life in prison. While I'm being held in solitary confinement, I got a letter from the prosecutors. We all got the same letter saying that this is the same as treason. Seditious conspiracy is analogous to treason, so therefore we're going to ask for life in prison. So these guys were afraid of going to prison, and they agreed to go ahead and lie. And they both signed a false statement of fact stating that I had planned since November of 2020 to attack democracy. That was part of the false narrative. So they turned on me. My co-defendants, like Kelly Meggs, again, the guy from Florida, leader from Florida, he was offered directly that, hey, if you'll say that Stewart Rhodes told you to go inside, you can go home. You'll be a felon, you can plead guilty, but you'll go home. We won't do any prison time. And to his honor, he wouldn't take that deal. Neither would my other co-defendants. Kenny Harrelson, Jessica Watkins, and Kelly Meggs all stood firm. But point being that was the goal, was to coerce false testimony. That's what they did. And so my rights violated. Day of my arrest, January 13, 2022, I was denied pretrial release, even though my priors were speeding tickets. I've been out for, it's a year after J6. I hadn't attacked anybody. I hadn't killed anybody. I hadn't fled the country. And yet they still said, oh, he's too dangerous because of his knowledge of how to access weapons and because of his knowledge of how to use encrypted chats. Signal and all those other chats out there advertise to the public at large about why you should all use encrypted chats, right? There's like commercials all over the place. But because I use encrypted chats, the judge said, oh, he's too sophisticated, his ability to use secret communication. So therefore, we're going to hold him in pretrial detention. So from day one, solitary confinement. So what that is 22 and 2 lockdown, which means you're in your cell by yourself. Imagine being locked in your bathroom. You're only let out 2 hours of the day with one other guy in your unit to go use the phones, take a shower, use a microwave, that kind of thing. But you're put back in your cell after that. That's what it was like. So your rights completely violated. I couldn't walk out of the unit without being put in shackles. In fact, in Oklahoma, where I was first put in Cimarron, I couldn't walk out of my cell without being handcuffed. I had to put my hands behind my back through the door slot, through the food slot, get cuffed. Then I'd be walked to the shower, put me in the shower, uncuff me through the door slot, take a shower, get recuffed. Back to, it was just ridiculous. I'm treated like Hannibal Lecter. So to go to a phone call with my lawyers, I had to walk through the yard with belly chains and ankle chains, and a black box device made it harder to get out of your handcuffs. And I'm walking past the yard where all the other guys are playing basketball and volleyball or running the track. And they're like, "What's going on with this guy? What are you here for?" And I said, "My free speech." They don't like my free speech. And they said, it said something like, "When are they going to let you free?" And I said, "When they grow a brain." That's what I told the other inmates. But here, these are guys that are murderers, armed robbers, hardcore gangbangers, whatever you want, just hardcore criminals. They're running around the yard free. I'm the guy treated like Hannibal Lecter. And all of that was done to try to coerce us into false testimony. And when the United States, whenever some foreign country holds an American citizen in extended solitary confinement, the U.S. State Department complains. They label it as a torture, and they complain about that. But our own government does it to Americans all the time. Just so you know, it's not just us; it's being done to other people too.
What's it like getting pardoned and not pardoned, but getting released from prison?
So back to your question about prison. So aside from that, I'll say that oddly enough, prison is very similar to being in the Army again, because you're thrown together with guys from all over the country, different rural country guys, urban guys, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. You're thrown together with a cross section of men from all over the country. It's very similar to being in the military, and of course you're very, very heavily regimented. It's kind of like being back in basic training. Yeah, very limited rights, and you have to learn how to get along. So in many ways, because I had that military experience, I didn't have any problems. Of course, they also see me on TV too. They're like, "Oh yeah, it's that guy with the eye patch." So I was treated. I never had an issue with any inmate or any guard. Frankly, I was treated very well by both. So that's fortunate. Although my rights were violated, I did a pretty good job of getting along pretty good with everybody. So other than my rights being violated like that and crappy food. Now, no. Here's the thing though: solitary confinement, that meant no sunlight for a year. It was a year before I put my feet on the grass or looked at an open sky above my head, and no sunlight, vitamin C deficiency. So that's pretty bad violation of rights. But the other inmates respected me. So just to answer your question about that.
Talk to us about your time in the military and how that influenced and your just your life in general, especially the founding of the Oath Keepers.
Well, yeah. So I joined the Army at 18, and I come from a family of military service on both sides of my family. So my grandfather on my dad's side fought at the Battle of the Bulge. My grandfather on my mom's side was a ball turret gunner on a B-17, and he didn't make it through the war. He didn't survive. So my mom, he never saw his daughter. My grandma was pregnant at the time he died. So my mother never saw her father, and he never saw his daughter. So, but like I said, my great uncles fought across the Pacific. My Mexican great uncles fought across the Pacific as infantry. So, I felt like it was my duty, my civic duty, to serve my country. And I took that oath. I took it seriously. As far as I'm concerned, that oath does not expire until I do. So I still feel the same way. I know other veterans feel the same way too. That's why Oath Keepers just tapped into what was, the founders put the oath in the Constitution. I didn't create it. The oath was already there. And Article 6 requires an oath be taken by every officer in every branch of government, federal and state, executive, legislative, or judicial, must swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution. So we all take the same oath. And the founders put it there for a good reason. They wanted us to always be under an obligation, individual obligation, to say no and break the chain. If the chain of command is doing something that's unlawful and violent, and the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? So if they're violating the Constitution, you have a duty to say no. It's not an option. You have a duty to say no. That's why I'm upset with any notion that the FBI agents who were sent out across the country, like 5,000 of them in a task force, to go persecute us, to go intimidate witnesses. Everybody who was a potential witness here in Texas for me got a visit from the FBI. In fact, multiple visits, and they were intimidated there was their goal to suppress witnesses. And we had multiple witnesses that as soon as we would announce we're going to call someone as a witness, they'd get arrested. Like Kelly Sorrell, our attorney, we listed her as someone we're going to call as a witness, and bam, they indicted her. So they indicted her and arrested her. And after her arrest, then her attorney let us know that she's not going to take the stand and testify. She'll get up there and plead the fifth and walk back off the stand. And that happened. The oath keeper from Florida that we went to his hotel room was with us that day, and he walked to the Capitol with us. He got up on the stand in our trial and pled the fifth and got back off the stand. And so, because everyone knows that if they arrest you, they're going to put you in solitary confinement. No one wants that. So people are afraid. So the FBI was sent out to, and they know we're innocent, but they just don't care. They're just following orders. And so they went out and harassed and intimidated and persecuted innocent people for political purposes. So every one of them should be fired. Every one of them had a duty to say no. They all should have been like Kyle Seraphin, who would not go along with it. That's an oath keeper. Small letters. A number of oath keepers, but that's my point is he kept his oath. He said, no, I will not comply with these orders. I will not participate in the violation of the rights of the American people. Every one of them should have said no. So the 5,000 that went along with unconstitutional illegal orders, they're oath breakers. They should be fired. It's ridiculous that Capital and Bongino are giving them a pass. So far, they haven't fired them. So it's a problem.
What is the future of yourself?
So I call the FBI. I call the FBI the FB lie, because they get up on the stand and lie their asses off. And it's not the first time. You can go back to COINTELPRO, the early history of the FBI. COINTELPRO. You can go to Waco, Ruby Ridge. You can go to the Whitmer kidnapping case in Michigan, where 2 FBI informants were the ones who hatched the plot and then hooked a bunch of innocent people into it and trapped them. Across the history of the FBI, it has been a politicized secret police that's used to hammer political opponents. And even when it's not doing that, it snares and entraps everyday Americans by creating crimes that they never would have committed. Like, I knew a guy, 20 years old, your age, in Cumberland prison there with me, in Medium prison. In fact, by the way, I had camp points. Okay, I had no prior history, right? I should have been in a camp, but they put in a management variable and put me in a medium facility, medium prison. But I'm in there with this kid at 18 years of age. He graduated from high school. He wanted to be an Army Ranger, so he decided he wanted to buy an AR-15 and start training. So he bought himself an AR-15, completely legal, goes to it, pays money to go and join an outdoor range, starts the training there. Some retired cop that works in the range sees him doing tactical training and decides he must be an extremist. So he calls the FBI. The FBI sends in their undercover snitch, who claims to be an ex-Hell's Angel, all covered in tattoos, Mr. Cool, with a bunch of cool guns in his truck, and befriends this kid, becomes his shooting buddy. Well, long story short, after a couple months, he's like, hey, would it be cool to have real full auto, instead of just bump triggers and stuff we've been playing with? So he talks the kid into buying a couple of selector drop-ins, selector packs for AR-15s, and then he gets swarmed by like 30 agents with guns. So they created a crime and trapped the kid, put him in federal prison. Now he hates this country. He doesn't want to serve in this country anymore. His grandfather had immigrated from Russia, so now he wants to move to Russia, even though he's born here in the United States. He wants to emigrate to Russia because he feels more free being a Russian citizen than being an American citizen after what the FBI did to him. So that's what the FBI does. So I've got no use for them. They should be disbanded.
What does the future of yourself as well as the Oath Keepers consist of?
Well, right now I'm the national spokesman for Condemned USA, which is like an ACLU for the political right. Because the ACLU wouldn't lift a finger to help any of us. They don't care. Even though my case was strictly free speech. That's the only evidence they had against me was open letters of President Trump and, of course, lawful possession of firearms. We stayed in our hotels. But they used all of our free speech against us. Only Condemned USA stood up for us. Well, Sidney Powell paid for my attorneys. So her and her group paid for my attorneys. That's good. But Condemned USA was started by another J6er named Prentice Evans, who had been himself, grossly overcharged, with obstruction of official proceeding, the 1512 one that got knocked out by the Supreme Court. So he started this organization to help people on our side of the political aisle that are still being persecuted across the country. So, and it goes on to this day. Like Tina Peters, the election official in Colorado, who was blowing the whistle on what she saw in 2020 election fraud. She was trying to preserve evidence and blow the whistle on that. They threw her in prison for 9 years under Colorado's criminal law. So that's what I'm doing now, spokesman for them. And part of that is also advocating for prison reform. Our prison system is horrible. It is truly the prison industrial complex. It's not designed to rehabilitate anyone. It's not designed to give them any path other than criminality. It's just cold storage to hold them in there, fill beds, make money for all the contractors that service the prisons, make money to sustain their budget. Every federal agency is always trying to expand their budget. This is what they do. And so they don't want you. That's why they're not complying with the First Step Act. They're willfully disobeying the First Step Act that was created by Congress, give men a path. As long as they do the class they're supposed to do, as long as they're under good behavior, they're supposed to get a chance to get out earlier. The prisons, I saw it myself, they don't comply with the First Step Act. They slow walk releasing guys because they want those beds filled. So there is a prison industrial complex, just like there's a military industrial complex that feeds off of war and feeds off of gross mismanagement or over expenditure of money. That's why you have ridiculous weapon systems that cost billions of dollars being paid for by the taxpayers. That is not really effective. Same kind of crap goes on in the prisons. They don't want you rehabilitated. Frankly, I think most of the men in prison, especially the ones that are there for nonviolent offenses like drugs or guns, gun possession or drug possession, they should be put in the military. They should be given federal pardons or federal parole and then allowed to go and serve in the military. That's what they used to do. They don't do that anymore. So you need to bring back federal parole and give guys a chance to serve their country and learn a trade. But they need to have better trade schools in the military in the prisons. But I really do think most of them belong in the military. That's what I would do with them. But that's not what they want. They don't want them to be productive citizens who stop reoffending. They want them to reoffend because it sustains the budgets. They get to spend a lot of money on law enforcement, and they get to spend a lot of money on the courts. All the lawyers make a lot of money, whether they're prosecutors or defense lawyers. They all make a bunch of money on this machine. That's the other thing about this, especially in the feds. Once you're indicted and you have no idea what's going on, right? Grand jury is secret. You don't even know what's happening. You have no opportunity to confront your accusers, no opportunity to present witnesses on your behalf, no opportunity to cross-examine anybody. You don't even know what's happening. The grand jury does not hear from you. The prosecutors are allowed to lie, willfully allowed by the judges to lie their asses off to the grand jury. So you don't know this is even going on until plop, you're set on the conveyor belt. Once you're friggin' indicted, you're on the conveyor belt to prison. And the only way you're going to be able to get off that conveyor belt to prison is to plead out. That's why most people take a plea deal. That's written, like President Trump said in that Meet the Press interview he gave. He said, I know the system, because now he knows it. It's a nasty system. A guy is told you can do 2 years, you can plead guilty for 2 years, or you can go to trial and get 30 years. And that then guy will take the 2-year deal. He goes to prison for 2 years, now he's a felon. But once you're on the conveyor belt, the defense attorneys and the prosecutors, it's like they're just, all they are is adjusting the little widgets on the conveyor belt. You're the widget. There's just adjusting you as you go on down. They're there to help you on the process down the conveyor belt, and it ends in a prison cell. And when you get out, you're now a felon. Who's going to hire you? You got this taint on you. You can't keep and bear arms. In a lot of states, you can't vote. Like here in Texas, I can't vote. So you're given this permanent taint on you the rest of your life. Now you're a second-class citizen. And so these guys go back to wherever they came from. And what do they have to make money with? If they were ever guilty of anything, a lot of them weren't. But if they were guilty of anything, they go right back to what they used to do: selling drugs, being a pimp, stealing cars, whatever they used to do to make money on the street. They're going back to it because they've been given nothing else to use. So prison reform in this country, not only prison reform, but also criminal justice reform. All these prosecutors and defense attorneys and the judges all collude in this absurd lie machine. The defense attorney knows his client's innocent. The prosecutor knows he's innocent. But they both cooperate and work up a plan to talk the guy into pleading guilty of something he did not do. Okay. Then they want to coerce him into false testimony against somebody else. A lot of guys in prison were there for what we call ghost guns or ghost drugs, which means no gun was found. They're a felon in possession, right? That's what they're charged with. But no gun was found on them. No drugs were found on them. But all they used was the testimony of somebody else who had been coerced and threatened with prison for decades in prison and forced to lie on the stand. That's what they call it, ghost guns and ghost drugs. A confidential human source gets up on the stand and lies because he's been coached to lie. Everyone knows he's lying. No one cares. The judges know, and everyone knows the guy's innocent. And yet, when you plead out, if you're coerced into a plea bargain, what happens is you're threatened with 30, 40 years in prison. So you sign this plea deal and you say, I am signing this because I am in fact guilty. I have not been coerced in any way. It's a total lie. It's all coercion. So you're signing on to a stack of lies, and everyone around you knows it's a lie, but they're all committing perjury. I mean, conspiracy to commit perjury. You're committing perjury, and nothing's done about it because the judges don't care. They're part of the machine. So that's what I'm saying. The system's broken top to bottom across the country. And I'm not just talking about feds. This is also in state courts too. It's a corrupt, broken system. It's as bad as being in like in a third world country or the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. You're going to get hammered when you go to court. That's what everyone pleads out. Unless you're a crazy, hardcore, stubborn bastard like myself and my co-defendants, and we say no, we're not going to plead out, and we didn't plead out. As a Christian, I will never bear false witness against somebody else. I'd rather spend my life in prison than to bear false witness. And I'm also, as a veteran, I saw myself as a POW, frankly, as a prisoner of war held by domestic enemies of the Constitution. I know a lot of those other veterans felt the same way. So that's how I saw myself. And what got me through was that I'm not going to give my enemies the satisfaction of breaking me. I'm not going to cooperate with the enemies of the Constitution, just like I wouldn't cooperate with a foreign enemy in war times. No friggin' way. I would consider that treason in my country to cooperate and assist the enemy. So I refuse to do that. And as a Christian, I will not bear false witness. So that's why I went to trial. And in my sentencing, you can go read my sentencing statement. I looked the judge right in the eye, and first thing I said was, I'm a political prisoner. Well, like President Trump, my only crime is opposing those who are destroying our country. And I said, once again, the election was obviously unconstitutional. I said, I can't ignore my oath, will not let me ignore the plain text of Article 2. The judge did not like that. He hammered me with 18 friggin' years. In fact, he even quoted an interview I'd given from prison. He quoted the interview I gave from prison where I said, hey, if they take away your ability to elect, to have a constitutional lawful election and elect your president, then you're put back in the same place the founding fathers were when they were resisting what was going on under the King of England. You have, what's your recourse? You have to resist. And guess what? That's protected speech. Unless you're actually inciting imminent violence that's likely to occur, that's the standard under Brown versus Ohio. Short of that, it's protected speech. For decades, communists have been calling for revolution in this country openly, and that's protected speech unless you're doing something that incites imminent violence that's likely to occur. But they don't care about that now. That free speech standard was never taught to the jury, in my case. They were never given that instruction. They were told at the end, because they could prove no actual plot, and they didn't put, the two guys that pled out, they didn't even get on the stand. I think they didn't put them on the stand because they were concerned that when they looked us in the eye, sitting there at the defense table, I think they were worried that they would just crack and tell the truth. They were coerced. So they didn't put them on the stand. They used them for propaganda purposes. The media could say, look, 2 more Oath Keepers pled guilty to seditious conspiracy. There really was a conspiracy, and Trump's at the top of it. That's the whole point of the propaganda. But because we didn't bend the knee, I could have gone home if I had turned on President Trump. Because at the top of the Oath Keeper pyramid, there's no one I could have turned on except President Trump. But like I said, I refuse to do that. So bottom line is that with all of this persecution of us, in the end, what has to happen in this country, there needs to be accountability. There needs to be complete disclosure. There should be a disclosure of every confidential human source that was sicked on us. And here's an important thing to know. I had a leader in Oath Keepers. I'm still under a gag order. I can't even say this person's name. But hey, you know what? God took care of that. The New York Times wrote an article about this snitch in my organization. We're going to call this guy as a witness in my trial, and then the prosecution said, "Oh well, actually, he works for us." I was completely floored. I had no idea. They had recruited this person in my organization since at least August of 2020 to be an informant against us, against Oath Keepers. Like I said, it was going on. This is during the Trump administration. FBI is actively infiltrating groups on the political right, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, all kinds of groups on the political right, sending in their informants, just like they did with the guys in Michigan. That was done during the Trump administration also, right? So they're out there actively pursuing the political right and trying to entrap people. So that's what was going on as a backdrop. So what should happen now? They should all be fired, all of 5,000 agents. There should be complete transparency. I believe every name of every snitch involved in the FBI that was sent out there to persecute political opponents to be made public, so their neighbors know who the hell they are. So they know this person in your neighborhood will take money to help put you in prison falsely. That needs to be taken care of. Until that's done, this system is still broken and corrupt. And the prosecutors should be put on trial for subornation of perjury and conspiracy to commit perjury. Until that's done, this system's going to keep doing this. It's not going to do it just to us on the political right. It'll do it to anybody who stands up against the government in any way, left and right.
George, I've been kind of taking questions for a bit. Is there anything you want to ask that I didn't ask or you didn't get to say earlier?
Well, I mean, we're coming. We're coming up on an hour now. Just so you know. So I'm probably going to go in a little bit. But just like to go into more detail about America as a whole and what you're trying to achieve here. What do you think? Like, what do you think the root of America, like the biggest problems that America's facing right now? Like, what is the root of them? Because I feel like a lot of it's division, but where does that division really come?
No, the division is false division. Division is divide and conquer. The root of it is corruption. It's while I was in solitary, I had a little radio that gave us AM/FM radio, and I happened to pick up a speech, actually like a public forum that Clarence Thomas was giving in Texas, and he said something. First of all, I quoted Solzhenitsyn because Solzhenitsyn had written a really good essay, a 2-page essay called "Live Not by Lies." I really recommend you guys read that. Where Solzhenitsyn basically says the regime lives on lies. It's everything. That's how it does everything. It's all lies. It's a stack of lies. And so the first step of resistance is to not participate in a lie. Even though lies permeate everything, let it not be through me. So don't further the lie. That's why I will not describe Biden as a president, because he was not legitimately elected. So, but he also said something I thought was really important. He said, when it comes down to it, it's the elites versus the people. That's the real division. It's a small group of elites at the very top worldwide versus the people of the earth. That's what's going on. It's the elites versus the people. And in between, you can see the like a pyramid, the world elites, the bankers and guys like George Soros, even deeper than that. That's your top of the capstone of the pyramid. Below that are all the people that benefit from the lies, all the bureaucrats, all the career politicians, career judges who are all either compromised because they're been blackmailed or they've been bribed. That's why members of Congress go into Congress and become part of the grift. That's why they got what's the salary of a congressman? $175,000 a year, and yet they all become millionaires. How does that happen? Grift. They're all insider trading. They're all doing land deals. They're all they get hooked up with the military industrial complex and buy the right stocks. So they get plugged in. So I would say corruption is the end. Corruption and lies are the two fuels that fuel the deep state. And back in the days I worked for Ron Paul, we call it the shadow government, permanent Washington, call it whatever you want to call it. But if the bureaucracy is about corruption, and it's people who go into office or seek power for personal gain, or they become compromised and lose their way. So we have a problem all the way down to the local town councils, local county governments. I was at church this morning talking to a retired cop, telling me all about the dirty police in his county here in Texas and the dirty politicians and how they were running drugs, cops running drugs, stealing people's property, confiscating property using eminent domain, all the things that dirty cops can do. He was talking about that. And if you stood up against them, if you were a cop, you got suicided. Talk about one officer that was killed right here. He knows it was a murder committed by other officers in the department. So that's going on in small town America. Okay. So this corruption is part of government. This is the problem of government. Is Here's one problem with government is that people who go into government oftentimes they're sociopaths who self-select. They're the ones who want that power, whether it's law enforcement or to be a lawyer or to be a politician or a judge. They want power. That's what they value more. That's what a sociopath values more than anything else, right? Is power. That's their aphrodisiac. It's the only thing that gets them excited is power. So they self-select for public office and to go into these positions of power. So that's a systemic problem. Only way to cure that would be to have some kind of a lottery system where you're randomly selected to go serve a term in Congress and then come back after 2 terms and go back home. That's the only way to not have that self-selection problem. So our system is corrupt. And this is what it is around the world. I mean, you can look at a third world, tin hat, banana republic dictatorship. And it's pretty obvious the dictator and his buddies get all the money, right? We give foreign aid to Somalia, went to the warlords, and the warlords then doled it out to their supporters, to their troops and their troops' families. This is what happens. It's what happens here too. It's no different. All the grift in Washington D.C., all that money that's going out, they started the closing with Doge, showing what's going on with USAID. That's the tip of the iceberg. So it happens all over the country. It's endemic. It's part of our political system. So how do you root that out? I don't know, but I'll tell you what. I think the one thing you have to do is, one, look past the artificial division of left versus right. It's not left versus right. It's really the people versus the elites. And then two, we've got to start local and root out the corruption at the local level. And that's not easy. That's hard. But as Patrick Henry said, eternal vigilance is necessary to protect liberty. He's right. Eternal vigilance. So my mission, because I'm a Republican, is to clean out the corruption in the Republican Party, to run out the rhinos, the ones that go into office for the grift. I'm going to root them out. If they violate the Constitution, I don't care what their excuse is, they need to be run out of office. I don't care what, at the state level or the federal level. So that's my benchmark is the Constitution. So that's my mission is try to defeat the deep. And maybe maybe I'm Don Quixote tilting at windmills, but that's my life mission. And I'm going to keep on doing it until they kill me someday. But I'm going to keep doing it. I'm never going to stop.
My last question, at the very least, would be: what advice do you have for young people?
Everything you're told on TV is a friggin' lie. That's one thing. You should assume it. If you assume that they're lying to you, in fact, if you invert whatever they say and flip it around, you're more likely to arrive at the truth. That's a shortcut to the truth. Like during COVID, we got a stack of lies coming out of not just the federal government, but also local government about COVID and about the shots. Don't take those shots. Those shots are poison. They didn't even go through animal trials, let alone human trials. Don't take the friggin' shot. And everything you were told about that shot is a friggin' lie. Total lie. So just, understand that news is propaganda. Look at how few hands control the news media. And look at how they're a lockstep. You can look at any issue out there and go look right now, and you'll see the talking points are almost identical across all the media. Just for one example of COVID. But another example would be the election. There was no fraud proven no fraud was proven that could have changed the outcome of the election. That's what you heard everywhere to this day. And you'll read mainstream supposedly articles that are supposedly news, not opinion, but they'll say Trump's unfounded or unsubstantiated claims, or false claims about election fraud. They label it as false because they're part of the propaganda machine. So just invert it, most likely be the truth then. But I think it's the same with Fox News, though. Same with Fox News, too. So don't trust the friggin' mainstream media of either side. Go and look for yourself. Go to original sources and do your own digging. Do your own fact checking. Don't listen to fact checkers. Fact checkers are propagandists. That's all they're there to do, is to get you to not look. Say, oh, we checked into that, and that turns out that's not the way you think it is. Well, what the fact checker tells you, invert that also. It's probably true, too. So just be very careful. Watch out for the sleight of hand, the divide and conquer. Think for yourself, and go back to basic principles. Do you believe in human freedom? Do you believe in personal autonomy? Like the drug war, they couldn't keep drugs out of prison. I'm in there and there are guys overdosing on K2, which is where they spray synthetic marijuana on paper and smuggle it into prison. Other prisons had heroin, crack cocaine, meth, all kinds of stuff. Where I was at, it was K2. but they can't keep drugs out of prison ever. And so what's the point of the drug war? And I know a lot of good Christians out there like, oh, drugs are bad. Well, so is alcohol. And yet that didn't work. Prohibition did not work. In fact, I was just about to put together a class because I was a GED tutor, an adult reading instructor in prison, and also a suicide watch companion. I watch over guys that were on suicide watch. That's how I know Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. I know what a real suicide watch looks like. Anyway, point is, though, I was about to put together a class. They had a really good video series in the prison about prohibition, about what a total failure prohibition was when they passed a constitutional amendment to ban alcohol. Complete disaster. All it did is create a black market for alcohol. Everyone was still getting drunk, but now people were dying because they were drinking bad alcohol that had been cooked up by an incompetent distiller or a moonshiner. So point is, you had corrupt cops, corrupt politicians. They interviewed one guy who was a kid. His dad was a moonshiner, talking about how his dad would go deliver in the halls of Congress to congressmen and senators, representatives and senators in Congress, his hooch, his alcohol. And he would go along with his dad to make these deliveries in Washington, D.C. because they were all still drinking. And then doctors, during Prohibition, doctors were now writing prescriptions for alcohol. That was one of the exceptions. You could have a doctor write a prescription. That sound familiar? Like with the opioids in this country, doctors writing prescriptions, making a lot of money. So what you wind up with the war on drugs is the same you saw with the war against alcohol. You wind up with corruption. You wind up with dirty cops, dirty judges, dirty politicians, with a black market that fuels the gangs, just like they fueled the Al Capone and the gangsters. It's no different now. And now you got 100,000 dead Americans from fentanyl overdoses every year. So what's the answer? Legalize the drugs. End the war on drugs. But no one wants to talk about that, or no one on the political right, sadly. So that's where I part ways with a lot of conservatives, because they're like stuck on this idea that they can somehow use the force of government to stop people from getting high. It's impossible. You're not going to keep them getting high. All you're doing is creating a black market and more death. And now you're giving China, our enemy, a real serious enemy, a way to kill Americans with fentanyl. And they're doing it intentionally. They use the drug cartels in Mexico as their proxies in a war against the United States. They call it unrestricted warfare. They're killing Americans. Most of the people that die from fentanyl overdoses are young Americans. So they're killing our military age men and women. So they're weakening our country intentionally and killing Americans. So you need to end that war on drugs. So it's just one example. Think for yourselves. Almost everything you hear out of the mouth of politicians is a friggin' lie. Almost everything you hear now, unfortunately, out of the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical industry is also a complete friggin' lie. Don't take their drugs. Go natural. Your grandparents didn't have all these friggin' Ozempic and all this crap. They weren't on psychotropics. They did just fine. Back in the Great Depression. Went through the friggin' Great Depression without any of that crap in their bodies. So stop taking all that crap. Get outside, get some friggin' fresh air. Lift weights. Work out. Train jiu-jitsu. Go learn how to box. Go learn how to be a man, especially you young men. Go learn how to be a man. You need a rite of passage. You're not going to join the military, then create your own rite of passage, whatever it might be. That's my advice to you guys, especially you young men.
All right, Luke, do you think that's a great place to off? I think it is. I don't think I could think of anything more
I
inspiring.
think it is too. Thank you for doing this, Stuart. Really.
Hey, and I want to thank you for everything you've done for the veterans. Like I told you, I escorted a World War II vet from Montana, Ren Bodecker. Awesome guy. This is on the wake of I did an escort for honor flight, whole plane load of veterans from Montana. It was so cool. It was an awesome experience to take. Some of those guys some of the guys were on there were Pearl Harbor survivors. Ren himself had been part of one of the liberation raids. Los Baños, I think it was Los Baños prison camp in the Philippines, Japanese prison camp, where they had a bunch of nurses and doctors along with soldiers who were being held by the Japanese. And the Philippine resistance let them know that the Japanese were planning on killing everybody in the camp. They were going to kill them all. So Ren's unit that night planned for the next morning to jump in. They jumped in, killed the guards, saved everybody. So he was part of that jump. Awesome guy. It's too bad I didn't get a chance to interview him. That'd have been great.
Do you know any World War II, Korean War veterans still alive? No one really knows these guys anymore. It's sad that we lose.
I'll look around here. I just got back from being in prison, right? So I'll look around. I'll ask around here in Texas. I'll try to find you a couple though. But in fact, I'm going to go back and try to see if I can find the old videos of Ren, I interviewed him. I'd be happy to give you his interview. It was good. Yeah.
Hold on a second.
All right. Any final words to the audience, or do you want me before I stop recording?
I mean, I would encourage them, if you want to support what we're doing, support Condemned USA, and they can do that. Maybe Give Send Go for Condemned USA. It's givesendgo.com. No, givesendgo.org. Yeah, .org /C's and Charlie USA. And if you want to support me, I'm rebuilding my life. I lost everything. They can go to givesendgo.org /GAF5B. So that's Golf Alpha Foxtrot 5 Bravo phonetically. That's my Give Send Go. If you guys don't mind, stick it up there somewhere. But I'm just trying to rebuild my life. And my life is, my mission is still the same. It's honor my oath. And I'm going to keep working. There'll be some kind of Oath Keeper 2.0 coming up. Just got to figure out what I'm going to do with it. So, but you'll see me again.
All right. Sounds good. All right.
All right, man. God bless.
3, 2, 1.